Ah, thank you. We've been reading in the morning classes from Uddhava Gita. We're going to continue. So far, it's been really educational and uplifting. 4 chapters we've covered from chapter 7 through 10. 7, 8, 9, 10. We just began chapter 11. Would it help if I gave a little background on Uddhava Gita? You three, yes? You three specifically, because the others, they've heard all this. 1, 2, 3. Background? Yes. Okay. It takes place in Dwarka, and it's a conversation between Krishna just before his departure. His pastimes are about to conclude, and well, I'll go back a little bit. Yesterday evening, we discussed Krishna's completing his pastimes in Vrindavan. It's nice to hear these things. Krishna completed his pastimes in Vrindavan after the last of the big demons, Dantavakra, was killed. Dantavakra was a close friend of Shishupal, and after Krishna killed Shishupal, then he went back to Dwarka. He killed Shalva, we heard yesterday evening. When Dantavakra heard that Krishna had killed Shishupal, he went looking for Krishna, to kill Krishna, revenge. And he went to Mathura. Narada informed in Dwarka, after the killing of Shishupal, but before Krishna returned back to Dwarka, Narada informed him, Dantavakra has gone to Mathura. So Krishna immediately, he had a really fast chariot. Within a moment, because he's all-pervasive Supreme Lord, he went to Mathura on his chariot. Within a moment. And there's a big battle between Krishna and Dantavakra. And Krishna won. And after Dantavakra was killed, Krishna was so close to Vrindavan, and his hesitation to go to Vrindavan was now removed. His hesitation to go back to Vrindavan was demons, knowing of Krishna's affection for the residents of Vrindavan, would go and harass the resident of Vrindavan. So he didn't go. That's at least one of the reasons. And so then Krishna went. He changed clothes. It went from a Kshatriya costume to a cowherd boy costume, so to speak. And he spent 2 months in Vrindavan. And one of his main missions, aside from giving his association there, was to send the residents of Vrindavan back to the spiritual world, because the manifest pastimes were concluding. So the eternal associates of Krishna would go to an unmanifest state. 3 things. Unmanifest state of the eternal associates of Krishna, so his eternal pastimes could eternally go on, but not manifest to worldly vision. That was one. Another was partial incarnations of the demigods had appeared on the order of Brahma to assist Krishna's pastimes. So they were sent back to their abodes in heaven, or they were sent to the spiritual world, along with his eternal associates who went to the spiritual world. And the third was a third manifestation of Krishna went back to Dwarka, because it was time to wind up his worldly pastimes. And Dwarka was a place where many, 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 many associates were. So Krishna went back to Dwarka. while in Dwarka, he made an arrangement for the residents of Dwarka to depart this world. The arrangement was a very interesting one. It was very different than how the residents of Vrindavan returned to the spiritual world. The residents of Dwarka, their return was as follows. Narada, at this time, Narada was in Dwarka. So now we're going to the beginning, early parts of Canto 11. We know Krishna's pastimes are largely in Canto 10. And Canto 11 comes after Canto 10. So Narada visits Vasudeva, or Vasudeva invites Narada to come visit him. And Vasudeva inquires from Narada about transcendental knowledge. So there's 2 chapters of Narada's teachings to Vasudeva, Krishna's father. At the end of that section, Vasudeva arranges a big festival, a big yajna, at his palace. And many great sages come, and it's a big yajna. Many dignitaries come. It's a big festival. And at the end of the festival, everyone's nicely remunerated. And then the brahmanas retire to a nearby place where it's not Prabhas, but it's nearby, a sacred place near Dwarka. And then the young boys, sons of Krishna and others, and the younger age boys in Dwarka, they go to that place and make fun of the brahmanas. That was a mistake. And the fun that they made of the brahmanas was Samba, one of Krishna's sons, dressed up in a sari and pulled his cloth over his head like he was shy and put a lump of iron under the sari. And the boys were asking the brahmanas, this lady here is really shy, but she wants to know whether the child is going to be a boy or a girl. The brahmanas knew what he was doing, what the boys were doing, and they said, a curse. This lump of iron that's underneath Samba's cloth will be the ruination of the entire Yadu dynasty. They made that pronouncement because of this very insulting offense to the brahmanas. Whoa. The entire Yadu dynasty is going to be destroyed. The boys hurried back to Dwarka, informed Ugrasena, who consulted his ministers. The ministers advised, grind that lump of iron into powder and throw it into the sea. It was done. Except for one part of that lump of iron wouldn't grind no matter what. So the powder was thrown and the lump was thrown, the remaining little lump. And that remaining little lump was swallowed by a fish. The fish was caught by a fisherman. A hunter bought the fish. When he opened up the fish, he saw the piece of iron, and he used that iron to make the tip of the arrow that shot Krishna in the heel. And that's how Krishna departed. You don't die from a heel wound. But Krishna left in that context. And then the rest, the powder, went out to sea and then washed up by the shore of Prabhas in some reeds, and the reeds became like iron, and those iron reeds were then going to later on, further in the 11th canto, the destruction of the Yadu dynasty took place from those reeds. So that's chapter 6 and of Canto 11. We're going to be reading from chapter 11 of Canto 11. But chapter 6, the curse happens. Krishna's alone. Krishna's considering. The stage is now set for the Yadu dynasty to return to their spiritual abode. Because he's winding up his pastimes in this world. I too will leave soon. But before I leave, I want to give instruction to Uddhava. So while he's contemplating like this, the demigods come to this remote place where Krishna is, or quiet place, and they offer their prayers, and they say, your purpose, you've kept your word. You promised that you would relieve the earth of the demoniac kings. It's now done. As you so desire, you may feel free to return. And they depart. So Krishna then, Uddhava comes, because Krishna's idea is that Uddhava should remain behind after everybody else goes. So he has to, he will arrange that. And I want to instruct him so that he can carry my message, give him some service, so he'll be able to carry on with his life with some service. And one service is to go to Badrinath, where the Narayan Rishi sages and their ashram is situated, because that's one place I didn't go because I wanted to give my association to my devotees, so I didn't go there. So he can go there. That was one service. And another service was he can travel here and there and give the same teaching. So Krishna arranges to give teachings. And the end of chapter 6, Uddhava comes, falls at Krishna's feet, says he's intimately associated with Krishna, so he knows what's up. Krishna's going to leave. So two things. He says, please take me with you. And then he says, please remove the undue attachment I have to worldly affairs, temporary things, family life, and this and that, so that, because they're obstructions to understand you and be fully absorbed in you. And that's how chapter 6 ends. Chapter 7 begins. Krishna instructs. Uddhava says, I don't get it. Please describe more fully. And then the next 3 chapters, 7, 8, 9, it's Krishna narrating a discussion between one of their forefathers, King Yadu, because they're in the Yadu dynasty. King Yadu had a conversation with an Avaduta Brahmin. And he asked the Avaduta Brahmin, wow, how did you become so detached? You're this and that and the other thing, and everything is set up for you to be an enjoyer, but you're detached, extremely detached. So how did this happen? Please explain. So the Brahmana explains in 3 chapters. I've learned everything from 24 gurus, which include the wind, the mountains, and so forth. Elements and birds and insects and bees and a prostitute, Pingala, and so forth. It's 24 gurus. They're listed and identified. And so he's learned, it's a summary in response to Uddhava's question of knowledge and detachment. Jnana Vairagya is a couplet that's throughout the Vedas. And it's presented by Krishna in a Purana, the historical narration. So the principle is embedded in their narration. So the narration helps understand the principle and the application of the principle in 24 different ways. And that's how chapter 9 ends. That's 7, 8, 9. And chapter 10, Krishna then explains how to get to that stage. And there's many, many, many nice things that are taught in chapter 10. We just finished chapter 10, and we're beginning chapter 11. So that's the background. The scene is Dwarka. It's Uddhava, who is Krishna's dear friend, like Arjuna is dear friend. They're both cousins. Uddhava's father is Vasudev's brother. They're cousins. And they're intimate friends. So Uddhava, has a capacity to understand even beyond Arjuna's capacity to understand, as far as his wisdom and depth is concerned. Arjuna is largely a Kshatriya, and Uddhava is largely like a minister. Like that. Like Vasudeva was in a ministerial role in relation to the king. And so Uddhava was like that with Krishna. So that's where we are. And here's the first verse. We've covered some parts of the first verse, and we're continuing because it's an important verse and there's a lot to say about it. So 11:11:1. Those of you that want to follow this along with your little handheld device and things. Here's the translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Uddhava, due to the influence of the material modes of nature, which are under my control, the living entity is sometimes designated as conditioned and sometimes as liberated. In fact, however, the soul is never really bound up or liberated, since I am the Supreme Lord of Maya, which is the cause of material nature. I'm also never considered liberated or in bondage." Now this word designated, it's an important concept and an important term that we're, in ISKCON, we're quite accustomed to hearing. Upadhi. Upadhi. One of the, from Narada Muni, from Narada Pancharatra, there are two very well-known definitions of bhakti. One of them is from Narada. And it starts, Sarva Upadhi Vinir Muktam. So when the soul becomes mukti or vimukti, freed from upadhis. Upadhis means designation. So what are some examples of designation? I'm a man, or I'm American, or I'm 6 feet tall, or something. The kind of things that it's how people identify us. Here's my thumbprint. Now it's, you're the facial, whatever they call it. So that's who you are. Here's my passport. Here's my place of birth. Here's my mother's name. That's who I am. The body. Then that's an upadhi, because the soul is not the body. When one thinks of oneself in terms of the covering, then that's an upadhi. I'm a sannyasi. I'm wearing a sannyas garment, but I'm not a sannyasi. Then who are you? Then the spirit soul. So the spirit soul has upadhis, or designations, both physical and gross physical and subtle physical. I'm smart, I'm not so smart, and so on. I'm wealthy, I'm not so wealthy. Things that are of this world they're so liberated, not liberated. That's also in this category of upadhi, according to what this verse is saying. And Krishna is giving this teaching. It's Bhagavad Gita 101. Now it's Srimad Bhagavatam 201. It's not a different idea that what's in Bhagavad Gita. It's just now going to go in greater depth. So get ready for a plunge into this teaching. Here's a purport by Bhaktisiddhanta. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of all potencies. It is only by speculation that the ignorant conditioned souls imagine that the Lord is devoid of variegatedness. And right away he's got his boxing gloves on and he's going to take some hits at those who are impersonalists, those who say God is not a person. There's no variety within God because he's a smoothie. There's no variegatedness. He has all potencies. So how can he have not variegatedness? Although the living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord's spiritual potency, he now identifies with the inferior potency of the Lord and thus experiences conditional life. The living entity is liberated when he contacts the superior potency of the Lord, which has three divisions: Ladini, or spiritual pleasure; Sandhini, the eternal existence; Samvit, or all-pervading knowledge. The Lord's existence is Satchitananda, and he never becomes forgetful. The living entities, however, being minute in quantity, are sometimes conditioned and sometimes liberated. Now, the commentary is saying sometimes conditioned, sometimes liberated. Krishna is saying not. So it's a distinction. We discussed this the other day, but we're doing it again. It's discussing the distinction between the soul and the covering of the soul. The soul itself is pure. The soul itself is already liberated. But when covered, we say conditioned. And when becoming freed from covering, we say liberated. But the soul itself is neither conditioned or liberated. The soul itself is the soul, part and parcel of the Supreme Soul, who's neither liberated nor conditioned. Paragraph. It's philosophy, what we're going to do. That's Uddhava Gita. The neutral state of the three modes of material nature is called pradhan. The neutral state of the three modes of it. So what's pradhan? Besides saying it's the neutral state of the three modes. In the process of creation, we hear from the Bhagavatam that the Supreme Lord Mahavishnu, he glances over pradhan. Pradhan is the undifferentiated state of material nature. What's that? It's like a big cloud, or in simple language, it's like a jumbled up warehouse. Everything is there, but it's not differentiated. That's what pradhan is. The three modes are not manifest, the different elements are not manifest. It's all mumbo jumbo. It's all it's all in a dormant state. Pradhan. Material nature in a dormant state. No modes, no different elements, just like a cloud. The neutral state of the three modes of material nature is called pradhan. When the three modes of material nature interact, they compete for control over the tiny living entities, thus creating a variety of manifestations. When the conditioned soul desires to free himself from the entanglements caused by the modes of material nature, he must take to devotional service of the Lord, which can elevate him to the spiritual world. Paragraph. In the spiritual sky, everyone possesses spiritual bodies that are not subject to change. Paragraph. In such a liberated state of existence, there is no possibility of being influenced by the three modes of material nature. After understanding one's eternal nature, one can see that he was never really a part of this material world. Wow. On the spiritual platform, there is no existence of the conception of liberation and bondage. Being the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord, one should use his minute independence. This is the free will question that was being asked the other day. Free will. We use our minute independence to engage in the Lord's devotional service and thus revive his original consciousness, which is eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. In such a state, there is no change, no chance of once again falling into illusion. That's Bhaktisiddhanta's purport to this verse we just read. Then there's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on this verse that we just read. But before that, there's Bhaktisiddhanta kind of summarizes Vishwanath's commentary, which is not the same as his. In this chapter, the Lord describes to Uddhava characteristics of conditioned and liberated souls. The symptoms by which one can recognize saintly persons, and the limbs of devotional service, those three topics. That's a summary of the whole chapter. The distinction between these two types, conditioned and liberated. What are the symptoms of the liberated? And what's the process of devotional service that gets one liberated? Paragraph. The Lord tells Uddhava that his question is unnecessary because the soul is never really bound by the material nature. It is simply an illusion, or this word designation, a covering. Here's a classic example of, because I learned this from studying Jiva Goswami, a classic example of upadhi is a pond or puddle. So supposing over there it just rained or something and there's a puddle. So you say there's a puddle. But it's just a covering over the earth. But you say it's a puddle. But it's a covering. It's an upadhi of the earth. And after some time the puddle evaporates and it's just earth. So for some time being it's a puddle. But it's not really a puddle. It's an upadhi. Like that. That's the classic example. So we're, whatever we want to say we are. There's my passport, here's my photograph, here's who I am, here's my name, place of birth, mother, father, my age, etc., etc. That's who I am. And that's how people know me. But it's not who I am. It's an upadhi. So liberated and bound or conditioned is an upadhi. That's what Krishna is saying in this verse. It is simply an illusion to think that the material body, which is created by the influence of the three modes of material nature, is the self. Paragraph. Only due to such illusion does the living entity suffer, just as one experiences distress in a dream. So, here over here is Buddhism, over here is the Vedas. And if you're a Buddhist and you ask the question, what's the root cause of suffering? You're going to say, the root cause of suffering is desire. But that's Buddhist teaching. The root cause of suffering is desire. How to become free from suffering? Become free from desire. How do you do that? You follow Buddha's teaching and you become free from desire. And what does it look like when you're free from desire? Nirvana. What's nirvana? Nothing. Or nothingness. Or void. Technically, it's the Sanskrit term nirvana means cessation of material existence. You can find it right in Bhagavad Gita, in Prabhupada's purport. Nirvana, a standard definition, cessation of material existence. So if you're a Buddhist and you cease material you become successful at ceasing material existence. What's on the other side of material existence? Nirvana. What's nirvana? Nothing. So what's reality? Nothing. Or nothingness. And that's the goal. And it starts with trying to become free from suffering. So now we'll go over here, and here's what the Vedas teach. The root cause of suffering is ignorance. And ignorance influences the soul to have ignorant desire. Ignorant desire leads to ignorant activity, leads to suffering. So if you want to become free from suffering, become free from ignorance. What's the antidote for ignorance? Is knowledge. So the Vedas are filled with knowledge. But we know Buddha rejected the Vedas and came up with something else. He used terminology from the Vedas, but he rejected the Vedas. So the Vedic approach is to apply knowledge to the living entity's condition so he can stop suffering. Remove remove darkness with light. Very simple. Oh, it's very dark. Okay, turn on the light. Oh, darkness is gone. Suffering is gone. Exactly what's in Bhagavad Gita. Those of you familiar with Bhagavad Gita. Brahmabhuta Prasanatma. There you go. When the Brahmabhuta stage, according to the teaching of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, it's Brahmabhuta. What does it mean? You understand who you are. You're Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi. And Brahmabhuta Prasanatma. There's a happiness that's of the soul that comes with knowledge of who we are. And we have nothing to do with the covering. We have one, but it's not me. And so when you're situated in knowledge of the self, there's an innate happiness. Because we're part and parcel of the Supreme Happy, Satchitananda Vigraha personality. So we also have Satchit and Ananda within us, tiny, quantitatively tiny, but qualitatively the same. So that's what's being disclosed. No, going for a deeper dive. Only due to such illusion does the living entity suffer, just as one experiences distress in a dream. Of course, material nature is not an illusion. It actually exists, just as the living entities also exist, both being potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Paragraph. It is the dream that he is part of the material nature that constitutes the illusion of the living entity. Thus, the soul is never actually bound because his existence is always superior to that of matter. That was Vishwanath explaining, or Bhaktisiddhanta explaining his commentary. Here's his actual commentary. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur lived in, little background, he lived in Vrindavan. Stalwart Acharya wrote many commentaries and very, very detailed explanations of things. Anyway, one of the principal acharyas in our disciplic line, residing in Vrindavan for a major part of his life. So he writes, in the 11th chapter, the Lord explains the difference between the liberated and conditioned souls, the qualities of the devotee, and the angas of bhakti. Angas means limbs of bhakti. At the end of the last chapter, Uddhava inquired about the liberated and conditioned jivas. Now the Lord explains that the question does not arise. It is impossible to say that a jiva is bound by the gunas, which are independent of me. The modes are under Krishna's direction. They're not, Krishna isn't bound by the gunas, and a living entity is connected to Krishna, so not bound by, but it appears to be by the imposition of illusion. And where does that illusion come from? When illusion comes from, when you turn your attention away from, this Prabhupada's explanation is very simple. When you look at the sun, what do you see? You see light. When you turn your back to the sun, what do you see? Shadow. That's what Maya is. It's a shadow. Or the absence of light. When we turn our attention, when we forget Krishna, we're under the influence of Maya immediately. There's no time lag. Immediately. And then removing that influence of Maya, it should be as simple as just turn around and face the sun again. Oh, wish it was so easy, because we're conditioned, we're say it stronger, we're addicted to darkness or forgetfulness. We're inclined to it, we're prone to it, but we're habituated to it. It's like a habit we can't give up. It's an addiction. Even though it brings suffering, we keep doing it and doing it and doing it, turning attention away. We turn our attention towards, and then we again turn our attention away. That's conditioning. That's the force of Maya keeps us in that situation, unfortunately. So to get out requires bhakti. That's what we're going to hear in this chapter. It is impossible to say that a jiva is bound by the gunas which are dependent on me, or that the jiva is liberated from them. Why? It arises by the inconceivable energy called avidya, or ignorance, right? Vidya and avidya. So ignorance is the cause of suffering. Avidya, potency, avidya, shakti, is the cause of suffering. And it's related to the gunas, because ignorance works by three modes. All three have ignorance. Ignorance in the sense of ignoring Krishna. Even those in the mode of goodness are more inclined to God than those in the mode of passion and ignorance. But they're not fully turned to God yet. It's still mixed. Thus, it's recommended go towards goodness, but your task isn't complete. That was the previous chapter, chapter 10. Those in the mode of goodness, they go to a good place, heaven, or even higher than heaven. Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Brahmaloka, in the mode of goodness. But it's still bondage, and there's still forgetfulness. It's better, but it's still bondage, and it's still forgetfulness. There's still birth and death. There's still the influence of time. And in the spiritual realm, there's no influence of time or the modes of nature. And that's the target for self-realization. Thus, it is only an appearance of a relationship with the gunas, body, and senses, a relationship difficult to accomplish. This is my opinion. Krishna is saying in the first verse, there is no bondage, and therefore there is no liberation, since there is no bondage from which to be liberated. Jiva Goswami writes, a false relationship with the gunas arises by Maya, or you can say avidya potency, which is related to Maya. They're like sisters. There is no bondage or liberation for me, Krishna is saying, since that arises from dependence on the gunas, whereas I am the controller of the gunas. Now, what follows is a really long explanation. I don't know if you're going to be interested in this. There's controversy sometimes. And what in the end, I'll just outline and we'll go. The controversy goes like this: A or B. There's a group of people that argue the living entity never falls, because you can't be in the spiritual world and fall from the spiritual world. So there's the living entities, there's some eternally liberated, and there's some eternally conditioned, and that's it. Now, the eternally conditioned can become liberated, the argument goes, but they're eternally conditioned, like permanently conditioned. And there's another school that says, like what you just heard Bhaktisiddhanta say. The other school says, souls, being part and parcel of the Supreme Soul, are pure like the Supreme Soul is pure. It's our nature to be like that. All souls, those that are in the spiritual world, those that are in this world, all souls are like that. It's just their nature. However, an non-causal misuse of free will occurs when, this is the problem, it places it with it as if an event in time, but as living entities, leaving aside the time factor, misuse of free will results in bondage. Proper use of free will results in liberation. Given living entities are neither liberated or conditioned, misuse of free will places them in the situation that appears to be real when it's not. Like in a dream, it appears to be real. Prabhupada's example, a person sitting on a throne, I'm a king, and then in comes a lion, and he screams, ah, and then he wakes up. There was neither a throne nor a lion. It was a dream. But when he was in the dream, he felt really good, and then he felt fear, and his heart's palpitating, and he's perspiring, and the bodily transformations that come about as a result of fear in a dream. But there's no substance in the dream. It's something, but it's not sat. Sat means eternal. It's asat. So some people don't like philosophy. It's like, oh gosh. So you can keep it simple and just say do devotional service, and the original consciousness is restored. But some people want to know, well, wait a minute. How come some are liberated and some are not? How did it, where did it come from? Where did this conditioned thing of being illusion, thinking other than reality, how did that come about? So that was the controversy. Some say this, some say that. And so there was a book written by a nice devotee who researched for about 3 years, gathering commentaries not just from our disciplic line, from all over the place, on different verses that commentators from different sampradayas give their teachings on how the answer to that question. So I'm going to read. And if it goes way over your head, don't worry about it. But some people like these details. One of the things that I find it's helpful, and there's not only two answers to this question. There is some diversity out there I've come across. Okay, so here's reference to this verse, 11:11:1. It's referenced in the text I'm going to read. It's the question, what about conditioned, what about liberated? Because that was the question at the end of the previous chapter. Okay, here we go. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11:10:37, that's towards the end of the previous chapter, Uddhava says to Krishna, quote, the same single entity is said to be eternally liberated and eternally conditioned. That is my confusion. Unquote. Uddhava's confusion here is obvious. The words Nityamukta and Nityabadha mean respectively, eternally liberated and eternally bound. So one living entity can be eternally bound and then become eternally liberated. So that's a contradiction. That's confusing me. Then, since nitya, or eternally, means without beginning or end, how can a single person be liberated without beginning or end, and also bound without beginning or end? Question mark. Taken literally, the terms nityamukta and nityabadha are logically incompatible. Lord Krishna himself will resolve this dilemma, namely that Shastras such as Srimad Bhagavatam describe the same living being as both nityamukta and nityabadha. Thus, Sridhar Swami comments on this verse. That's the question of Uddhava from the previous chapter. Sridhar Swami. Sridhar Swami is the most celebrated commentator on the Bhagavatam who lived before Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's from the Nimbarka Sampradaya, etc. He's not. Lord Chaitanya accepted his commentary. The commentary reads, Uddhava states, quote, since liberation is brought about, parentheses, at a particular time, and because this entails its not being eternal, would it be acceptable to call a soul who achieved liberation nityamukta? Therein lies my confusion. So an event that's within time, how can you say it's nitya? Eternal. In Srimad Bhagavatam, 11:11, 1 through 3, that's our verses, Lord Krishna answers Uddhava's question about the eternality of both liberation and bondage for an embodied soul. Quote, the Supreme Lord said, the term bound and liberated are an explanation from the modes of nature, not from real substance. Because Maya is the root of the modes, and I am the Lord of Maya, there is no liberation and bondage for me. Sridhar Swami comments on that, today's verse. Regarding that which was spoken by Uddhava, quote, a single person alone is eternally liberated, eternally bound. This is my confusion. Is that statement a contradiction in substance or in belief? Not the former, because bondage and liberation have no real substantiality. Substantiality. Sat. It's not eternal. Says Prabhupada uses this. It's philosophy. Prabhupada uses this language in the first verse of Bhagavatam. Substance and reality. No, substance and category, excuse me. So here's an example. Here's a chair. And according to Plato's teaching, some of you are in high school, went through high school philosophy. I learned this in high school philosophy. It has a whole essay on chairs. Before there was a chair, there was an idea. And abstractly, before there was the idea, there's a realm that has chairness. And from that chairness comes the idea chair, comes the chair. So the chairness place, that's substance. And here's category, chair. So there's no substance here, it's just categories here. So to say bondage, it's not substantial because it's temporary. I mean, there's a chair and I can sit on it, I can use it, but after some time, it's dust. And before it was chair, it was a tree. And who knows what else, like, a cotton plant or whatever else is in here. It's elements. Becomes a chair, becomes elements. So it's a category, and I can use it, but the substance is something else besides chair. There's chairness, there's the realm of absolutes. That's Plato's idea. Prabhupada doesn't go into that specifically, he just used the language. Substance, or sat. There's no satness about the bondage. It's not the eternal condition of the soul. I'm not a sannyasi. There was a time when I was something else. And there was a time when I was something else, and there's going to be a time when I'm something else. So I can say I'm a sannyasi, but I'm not a sannyasi. It's a temporary situation that's not eternal. There's no substance in that designation of being a sannyasi, etc. So bondage is also just, there's no substance. There's no substantiality to it. Now you see it, now you don't. The rabbit in the hat. The magician comes on the stage and shows you the hat and pulls it inside and out. It's just a hat. And then he reaches in and pulls out a rabbit and shows everybody the rabbit, and everybody goes, applauds, and he puts the rabbit back in the hat. The rabbit's gone. Like that. Now you see it, now you don't. It's not substantial. Now that's just a visual trick. But Maya is also making visual tricks. Something appears to be substantial. Here we are, sitting in your basement of your home. Doing what we're doing. It's not. The sound vibration itself is substantial because it's not dependent upon time, place, circumstance. It's eternal. And the idea of yoga is to connect with the eternal. That's what Krishna is doing with Uddhava. Both bondage and liberation have no real substantiality. This is stated in 2 verses, beginning with verse number 1. Tomorrow we'll go to verse number 2. The soul is bound and liberated not in substance, but by the modes of material nature. We're bound by the modes. But the soul is not. That is, by the designations of the modes of goodness, etc., which are dependent on me. Should I go on? It's like philosophy's hard. Yes, it's okay. Okay. One may raise the objection that even when the bondage and liberation of the soul are based on a condition of material condition designations, like, I'm sitting in the chair, I'm standing up. Neither of those are eternal. The chair isn't eternal. My standing and sitting aren't eternal. So you make some statement that's not based on eternal, but it's based on some designations. Still, there is substantiality in this world in activities such as cooking rice. This is a Purva Paksha. Someone's arguing. Wait a minute. The rice is boiling and the rice is going to be cooked, and so, that's substantial. You eat the rice after you offer it to Krishna. So what's wrong with that? Saying that it's substantial. In reply to this, it is said, now this is still Sridhar Swami writing commentary, because the modes of nature are based on Maya, there is no bondage. Therefore, there is also no liberation. The soul is not bound. There's illusion that we connect with because of false ego. We identify with, I'm sitting in a chair. Or, I'm a sannyasi. Or, for some time I'm a sannyasi. Or sometime I'm a grahastha, or sometime I'm a teenager, or sometime I'm an old man, or sometime something. I'm born over here, and sometimes So and I identify with it. Then time moves. That was a whole discussion about how time moves in the previous chapter. Time moves everything. It doesn't stand, stuff doesn't stand still. I mean, the building is here, but there was some time there wasn't this building here. And after some time, the building's going to be gone. And who knows what's going to be here in place, but as you know, it's not here permanently. So we're using it, fine. But it's not substantial. So the soul's covering is also not substantial. The soul is substantial, but the covering is not. That's what's being said. One may then object. This is still Sridhar Swami's commentary, going back and forth with the people that are going to argue with you. How is something that contradicts all the Shastras being spoken? Condition liberated. In reply, it is said in this verse by the Lord himself, that is my explanation. That is, thus I have made my decision. Enough with these exceedingly bad arguments. This is the meaning. Or it is also construed in this way. The soul is bound. Or liberated. This explanation or statement based on the modes of nature is coming from a dependence on the modes, which comes from me. In this case, the Lord states that he is separate from the modes, since he is personally the controller of the modes, being their cause. Thus the Lord states, for me, there is neither bondage nor liberation. The rest of the verse is the same as explained above. I'll just go a little bit further because it's kind of arduous. The author here is now just going to summarize what we just heard in 5 points. 1. Sridhar Swami contrasts substance, the Sanskrit word in this case is vastu, and I was using the word sat as it's eternal, but there's another word that's being used here, vastu, means substance with pratiti, or belief or opinion. Sridhar Swami explains that Lord Krishna resolves the conflict by saying that the very terms Nityamukta and Nityabadha exist in the realm of Maya. There's the key. There's the realm of Sat and there's the realm of Maya, and one can use those terms in the realm of Maya, and they're appropriate. Like I'm sitting in a chair, or I'm a sannyasi, or whatever we might say about my existence or one's existence. But it's within the realm of Maya. And as far as the realm of the absolutes is concerned, which is like what Plato was writing, there's chairs, or there is a chairness in the realm of the absolutes. There's soulness. That's who we really are. We're not the coverings within the realm of Maya. This is true in 2 senses. A, the condition described by these terms is a product of the modes of nature. That's Nityabadha, Nityasiddha. The terms are within time and the modes of nature. B, the language itself is a product of Maya, since the Lord declares in this verse that Maya is the root of the modes. The 3rd point out of 5, the conflict in language is resolved by saying that the language is not literal, but rather comes from the same illusory realm that it describes. I like the other one, the other explanation better. 4, since the same person cannot be literally eternally liberated and eternally conditioned, it must follow that the words are being used in a non-literal sense. That's important. The realm of time exists here And time is eternal in the spiritual world. And there's no time as we know it in the spiritual world. There's modes of nature in the spiritual world as we know it in the spiritual world. There's variety, but there's no modes of nature, which here the modes of nature create the variety. Like I'm a sannyasi, and someone else is a brahmachari, and someone else is a vanaprastha, someone else is a grihastha, created by time and the modes of nature. But it's not who we are. The terms themselves are generated out of time and the modes of nature. Okay. Lord, this is next text. I'll just quickly touch on this. Lord Krishna goes on to say, text 2, that's what we're going to cover tomorrow. Grief, illusion, happiness, distress, and accepting a material body are but perceptions caused by Maya, just like one's perception of a dream. You know, like in a dream. I'm sitting on a throne and here comes a tiger, and I scream. And when I scream, I wake up. I'm perspiring and my heart's palpitating, and there's bodily transformations caused by the dream. That's not substantial. But I was experiencing something, and it's brought about bodily transformations. So it's not false. It's just not substantial. Material existence is not based on substance. So Viraraghava Swami is from the Sri Sampradaya. He comments on this verse as follows. Thus, having stated that there is for him, for Krishna, no karma bandha, based on the three modes of material nature, now, in this verse, beginning with the word shoka, the Lord states that the jiva's bondage in material existence, samsara bandha, is not eternal or anitya. Bondage is not eternal. Bondage is within time. The soul is not within time, so the soul is neither bound or liberated. But there's this temporal or Mayic sense, either way you want to say it, that so it applies. It's language that's in the Vedas that applies to the conditioned state, and it's also true. There's language in the Vedas that says it's not, because it's not. There are souls that are, by their nature, not part of Maya and time. Two more, and there's more than two more, but Sridhar Swami comments on this second verse as follows. Because the modes of nature, existing as the cause, are themselves constituted of Maya or illusion, so material existence is said to be Maya, being an effect of those modes. Thus, the Lord elaborates in this verse beginning, Shoka, Maho, just as a dream, just like the dream of the soul in this verse means like a mere perception as illusion of one's consciousness. So, here's the way it's said in Bhagavad Gita. I think I'm just going to stop with that. It's said in Bhagavad Gita in two places. Never think of yourself as the cause of action. Never think of yourself as the cause of the results of action. And never think yourself as the enjoyer of the results of action. For all this is carried out by material nature. Material nature means the modes. So the modes It's likened in Bhagavad Gita to a machine. Just like most of us got here by getting in a car. And a car is a machine. The car got us here. But we're not the car. We're not the machine. So it's similar. You do stuff, and you're doing stuff, but never consider yourself the cause of activity, or the cause of the result of the activity, or the enjoyer of the result of the activity. All this is being carried out by material nature. We're on a machine. And if you identify with the machine, that's called Maya. And if you move in the machine, we got here with a car, fine, you use it, but don't identify with it. We're using our bodies to walk across the floor, but never. So what's going on when you walk across the floor? The material nature is doing its thing. For some time, I'm a sannyasi. And then sometime I'm going to be gone. And all of us are going to be gone. And sometime we're this, and then it's going to be something else. So what's substantial is that we exist. And then in what way do we exist? This is self-realization. Who are we? What's our mission in life? And all those important questions that we're usually too busy being successful to, contemplate. Successful in terms of the temporary. But self-realization means you do the temporary. You engage yourself with the car and the microphone and taking bath and cooking and doing things that you do. But while doing those things, connect with who you really are. That's the mission of human life. So back to, we started with the context. Uddhava is a very dear friend and devotee. And he wants to know from Krishna, how do I overcome this obstacle to really know you? And that is my affinity for matter. So we're getting like a deep probe in overcoming affinity for matter by knowledge. When matter does its stuff, what is it that's going on? And to get so it's knowledge that's meant to lead one to bhakti. Knowledge, say it negatively, knowledge that doesn't lead one to bhakti, it's really dry. It's like sawdust. Have a nice plate full of sawdust. It's not yummy. But knowledge that brings one to unobstructed shelter in Krishna, it's yummy. It relieves suffering. Knowledge relieves ignorance, but more the mad bhaktim labhate param. Back to that verse from Bhagavad Gita. That's where pure devotional service begins. Unobstructed devotional service. Mad bhaktim labha. Labha means obtain. Mad bhaktim labhate param. Para. Transcendental shelter in Krishna, pure devotional service is obtained when the obstructions are removed. So that's what Krishna is doing with Uddhava. And if we read it carefully, that's what Krishna is doing for us through Uddhava. It's not just philosophy that's kind of like, you scratch your head and try to understand it, kind of philosophy. There may be a little puzzling, but it's meant to clear the obstacle due to affinity for matter, and affinity for being the enjoyer of matter. That's what keeps us stuck. I will share with you, and just end with this. In the past 3 weeks, I've probably been asked 10 to 15 times the same question. And it's been settings like this where it's different audiences of people, but 10 to 15 times the same question. And the question goes like this. That's the question. Like I can, when I'm in the our Bhagavatam reading group, I get all these realizations and I get some understandings and I'm feeling really invigorated. And then, how do I stay up there? Am I doing something wrong? Different ways of asking the question. And it's symptomatic of unsteady bhakti, anishtata bhakti in Sanskrit, unsteady bhakti. How do you get to the stage of nishtha, or steady bhakti? Steady, up there, consciousness, instead of the up and down and up and down, the hills and the valleys and the high, higher consciousness and lower consciousness, and sometimes getting stuck in the lower consciousness platform. And then some time moves things and it goes back up again, or it becomes a little bit different. It's a classic. What Krishna is doing is helping our Uddhava, and by helping Uddhava, he's helping us come to that stage of higher consciousness, where the obstruction is weakened. The obstruction to Krishna is being weakened. And it's opening the door for pure bhakti. Because we're in mixed bhakti right now, most of us. Mixed. Something and something. And that's where we are. And sometimes a little higher in the mix, and it's sometimes a little lower in the mix, and we're in mixed bhakti stage. This is, another one of the questions, asked maybe 40 times. How to go from where I am to where I want to go. So I've been taking the position. I'll say it this way. I heard Jayadvaita Swami said that all the how-to questions can be answered by sadhusanga, which is what we're doing right now. Because when you have sadhusanga, what do? Bhajana kriya. That's what we're doing right now. Whether it's kirtan or just topics or worship or something, taking prasadam together. Very soon that's going to happen. And that's sadhusanga. So what sadhus do, they do bhajana kriya and talk messages about Krishna. Katayan tapshamam dityam tushanti charamant. So what's in here in Uddhava Gita is a graduate study of what's in Bhagavad Gita. So become familiar with Bhagavad Gita, and everything that you need to know is there. And if you want to understand it more fully, this Uddhava Gita is really good. It's a bit of a stretch. It's a little arduous, but it's all there. And it's meant to remove obstacles so that pure devotional service is what's left. Hare Krishna. To be continued. Let's see if there's some discussion.
Danda Pranam Prabhu.
You got to be a little louder than that.
Danda Pranam Maharaji.
There we go. Okay.
As you mentioned, is same like how question.
How to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally in Vrindavan, all gopis does all their works with complete Krishna consciousness. So seems all those regular activities.
All those what?
All those regular activities, whatever we do in the normal
Your
life.
daily activities, yeah?
Yeah. But when we are doing, like, suppose we are working on that, so that time we may not able to put our consciousness, Krishna consciousness. So how to maintain that Krishna consciousness is all.
That's the question. The repeated question. By carefully taking up the practices of sadhana bhakti, that's called bhajana kriya, it has the effect of eradicating the unwanted things within the heart. Right? Anartha nivritti. You're familiar with these terms? No? No. Oh. Okay. This is Rupa Goswami's teaching. There's stages. And one of the stages of bhakti is eradication of the obstacles in the heart. The method for eradicating or removing the obstacles in the heart is devotional activity, bhajana kriya. Clear? And bhajana kriya gets its support from sadhu sangha. So sadhu sangha, bhajana kriya, anartha nivritti. The obstacle is the impurities in the heart, and they're removed by strong bhajana kriya in association of devotees. Which means it requires practical application. You hear something and you apply it. Not just passive, but active. Hear something, you apply it, and then you continue to apply it, and you continue to apply it. It's like practice. By practice, it becomes, when you take up healthy activity, your good health is restored. Good healthy activity and good medicine. The hearing is the medicine. And the practical activity that's wholesome, you just do that. It becomes second nature. The original healthy condition becomes restored. That's how to.
Because sometimes in a day, our mind definitely.
Of course. Of course. Of course. That's the conditioned state. And we're very habituated to it. We're very accustomed to it. It's quite natural. We don't have to try for it. It just comes. Goes from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And in the course of, sometimes there's happiness, and sometimes there's stress, and sometimes there's transition, and sometimes there's, something else. We just keep bouncing around. It's the modes of nature pulling us and pushing us. And we're living our life as best we can because we're trying to be good people, moved by the machine, material nature. So the solution is bhakti, and bhakti begins through association with bhaktas. Sadhu means bhaktas. And with sadhus, you do what sadhus do. Bhajana kriya. You do in your own home because you learn from the sadhus. So you do, and then anartha nivritti. So just stay with the course. In the language of Bhagavad Gita, it's put very simply. Abhyasa yoga. Yuktena. You practice. You practice makes perfect. You know that expression, practice. So practice in the right way, and then gradually the purification and stage of perfection is restored. Health is restored by good medical physician and diagnoses the disease and gives you the medicine and gives you the diet, and gradually stay the course. Well?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Dandavat. So the two different opinions about the origin of the soul.
Not origin. How liberated versus not liberated. Not origin of the soul. There's two different questions. Where does the soul come from, and how does the soul become conditioned?
Okay, so whether the soul has fallen from the spiritual world or is eternally been a conditioned soul.
Yeah.
They're two different.
They're two different.
So,
What's the conclusion? That's what your question is?
If I really catch your message, that both has plus and minus, so it just really...
The answer hasn't been elaborated yet in Krishna's words. It's only going a little bit. Krishna is not in this section of the Bhagavatam, in Uddhava Gita. He's not yet addressed your question in its fullness. Rather, Krishna is saying, the question itself is inappropriate. That's what he's saying. I mean, we just read what the Acharyas say. It's an inappropriate question. Here's this can go on, as you know, and on and on and on. You've been around for a while, you know it goes on and on and on. And there are different persons who have reached their conclusion, and some haven't. And there's different, very colorful versions of those two. And there's more than two. So, I like the way that Bhaktivinoda Thakur answers this question, and I guess we're just going to have to go through the topic too many times, and I'm going to start getting annoyed because it's going to come up again and again. It's not something... Here's a few simple points. It's not something that our binary processor can understand. The mind is a binary processor, and it's not. It's either this or that. It's a 1 or a 0. So which is it? The 1 or the 0? And it's so the mind cannot comprehend it. As long as we continue to try with the mind to comprehend it, we'll not reach a conclusion. So how to understand what Krishna is saying? Here's the way Bhaktivinoda Thakur says it. I can send you the quote. It's written in English. It's not a translation. It's his English. In Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts. You familiar with that book? The year that Prabhupada was born was 1896. That very same year was the year that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in English, sent an 86-page pamphlet around the world, out of his own pocket's expense, to libraries around the world. One copy was found at McGill University. You're familiar with that history? Yes? Okay, here, for those of you that are not familiar. Some devotees in Toronto found a copy in the university library of a publication that was published in 1896 and sent around the world because Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted at least the scholarly people should know who was Lord Chaitanya and his teachings. So he composed an 86-page, really, offset printing, really crummy quality, simple bound book called Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts. So it's two parts. His life, a summary of Chaitanya Leela, Chaitanya Charitamrita, highlights. And the second half is his teachings. And in the teachings section, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, went through the 10 essential teachings of Lord Chaitanya that are in something like 70 of his 100 books. It's called Dasamula. So it's right there in the second half of the book. And one of the mulas of the 10 touches on this topic, and the language goes pretty much verbatim. Do not ask the misleading question, when, that's the key word, the living entity was created, or when the living entity was enthralled, because they're not events within time. And he goes on. So the living entity exists eternally, and the living entity's enthrallment, we're hearing from Krishna, it's within the realm of time to say the living entity becomes liberated or living entity becomes, but Bhaktivinoda says it's not an event within time. What does that mean? This is my understanding of this topic. It's not an event within time, but it's a ontological event. What is an ontological event? Ontology is the science of being. Or what is the essence of something, ontology of something. So living entities misuse their free will, but it's not an event within time. And we can read it again. As the living entity becomes liberated, he realizes that was never enthralled. Because it's not an event within time. Because there is no enthrallment, there is no liberation. From the worldly perspective, there certainly is enthrallment and there certainly is liberation. From the transcendental perspective, there's neither. The soul is sat. It's not influenced by time, nor the modes. But this is the description of the modes. So the question itself is irrelevant. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, don't ask the misleading question. Because if you ask it, the one side says living entities fell. And Prabhupada uses that kind of language. Fall of the jiva. That's the issue. But that's a description within time. Once upon a time, this is the puzzlement. Once upon a time, I was in the spiritual world, and I thought, gee, it's time to go and enjoy. And then, poop, we fall out of the spiritual world, as if it's an event within time. And then we're trying to get back to the spiritual world. That's a chronological event. The once upon a time, and then something, and then something. That's chronology. Then there's an ontological event that the living entity turns from Krishna. And here we are. It's an ontological, it's a misuse of free will, and proper use of free will is the option. Turn our attention again to Krishna. And we struggle, we do sadhana to restore that. It's an ontological restoration, not a chronological one. That's my understanding of this dilemma. Now, there's a whole chapter, or at least the first third of the chapter is addressing the topic. I suggest you read it carefully. I can send you, the compilation of all the commentaries, so you can go through it carefully. And it goes, back and forth and back and forth. And it's, the binary processor isn't going to get it. As long as one applies the binary processor to get it, you won't get it. So what do? Just hear. What does it mean? This is not an event within time. It isn't. There are events within time. I'm sitting in a chair. I'm a sannyasi. But that's not who. So who are we and how we get here? It's not an event within time. That's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teaching. Don't ask the misleading question. Living entities exist. So we say, the language is, living entities are emanations of the Tatastha Shakti, marginal potency of the Supreme Lord. So it's not like once upon a time the Lord was in the spiritual world and he looked at his watch and he said, you know what? I think I'd like some living entities. Boop, there's living entities. It's not it's not a chronological event. It's an ontological existence of a relationship between us and the Supreme Lord, the part and parcel and the source. That's an ontological statement. We're part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. That's substantial. And we have a nature, and we have been misusing that nature. That's an ontological statement. Now, within time, we're striving to restore that original consciousness. It's a very telling statement. Bhaktisiddhanta, I can read it again. One will realize I was never enthralled. Sure feels like it. That's the next verse, Shoka. We're going to die. Lots of people, lots of the devotee community that I interact with are experiencing grief because somebody, a relative or somebody or something, lost their life due to COVID or other things. And it's something people deal with. We can't just say, oh, it doesn't exist. That's, we're not going to do that. It's a little bit like, anyway, I'm going away. It's like the interaction between Angira Muni and Narada Muni with King Chitraketu and that whole situation. Before they could even give transcendental knowledge, he had to let go. And when he let go, it was enormous grief, and then they could speak, and he could get it. And then beyond detachment through knowledge comes bhakti. And it sure looked like an event within time. Becoming liberated looks like an event within time. Time is a very fascinating and very important subject. So what's the influence of time in enthrallment and liberation? Bhaktivinoda says it's misleading. The question itself is misleading. And it ties into these few verses in the beginning part of chapter 11. The question itself is misleading. And it's a puzzlement. Uddhava's puzzled, what to speak of you. Living entity is Nityabhata, same living entity is Nityasiddha. It's a contradiction. They can't both be. So then we're hearing it's not to be taken literally. It's not of a substantive sense of Nitya. It's some other one.
Thank you,
I'm
Maharaj.
surprised you're all still sitting here because this is philosophy is hard to hear. Anything else? Someone else want to raise it in the back there?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. So I was thinking about the upadhis, designations. We have so many.
So many.
The material nature exists. The living entity exists.
Yeah.
The designation exists too. They are temporary. The knowledge helps me that designations are temporary.
Yes.
I'm able to engage in bhakti because of the knowledge. But in order to detach from that, so many designation is not happening in a practical way. So I don't know if I'm making sense.
You are. It's very clear. So now comes the question, what to do?
Yeah,
Stay the course. She ask her, she knows. Sadhu Sangha Bhajana Kriya Anarjana Vritti. That's what we do. With faith. Adau Shraddha. They're the first, by the way, Mataji, those are the first 4 stages. 1, preliminary faith. 2, association with devotees. 3, devotional activity. 4, eradication of unwanted things from the heart. 5, become steady. That's the, how do I get steady? You go through the first 4. Same. So you're doing. But the apadis aren't going away so quickly. That's the next one. I'm not there yet, club. How long does it take? It's everything. Your question is a topic that we're going to be discussing next weekend, but I'll just touch on it. Next weekend's the Festival Holy Name. According to the same sequence that I just mentioned, there's a very nice explanation given by the same person I mentioned already a couple times, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Unsteadiness or slow progress is due to laxity or indifference in our effort. So how long depends on the laxity or indifference, or the other opposite, focused and strong, or tivra, or vigorous, purposeful, mindfulness. That's a popular. So here's a little image. It's going to be on this coming weekend. Supposing you want to cook some rice. Some basic things are required. Fire, pot, water, and rice. And little salt. 5 things. So, how long will it take? It depends on the fire. And if supposing you have a really strong fire, but supposing you put the pot 6 feet ahead above the fire, it's going to take longer. But the closer you bring the pot to the flame, and the strong flame, it's going to be quicker. How long? Depends. That's the abhyasa. How strong is our abhyasa practice? And then there's another factor, and that's the mercy factor. How much are you or me or any one of us, or conscious that I can't do this on my own? This abhyasa program, I can practice, but through the times that I have very steadily and sincerely and seriously applied myself to practice, I realize that I need help, divine help. That's the calling for mercy. That's another factor in how long it's going to take. That's bhakti. It's not just doing something. It's with the mood of love. I'm looking to the beloved to help me, and that's going to come out in this coming weekend's talk on. I'm calling it indifference. We do, but we're distracted. Give her the microphone. We want to do all this, but what? Speak.
Bodily needs like sleeping and hungry, these are all dominating. Bodily needs like...
Bodily needs.
Yeah.
They're displacing our efforts.
Yes.
Got it. So then you have to learn the art of letting those bodily needs be connected with the higher purpose. It's consciousness, it's not just time. You with me? Do your necessities, no problem. Do your cooking and your this thing and your bathing and cleaning and working and taking care of the kids, and the kids are taking care of their homework, and we do our things. We perform, as Krishna's words, perform your prescribed duty And always think of me. That's the formula. Now, how do we always think of Krishna? Because I'm too busy doing my things. That's the next question. You do your devotional practice, carefully, and you'll be thinking of Krishna as you're doing your household things, your everyday things, whatever those everyday things are. For you, it's one set, and for me, it's another set, and for these kids in school, it's another set, and we all have our duties according to our position and stage of life, and we do them with mind on Krishna. How do we do that? By careful sadhana. That's the abhyasa part. So some part of your day, some part of your life is focused time on very careful sadhana. And then it carries over to your duties of life. It takes a while because we're distracted.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, yes. These regular activities, yes, we are doing Krishna consciousness. Particularly whenever we are doing work, definitely my mind has to concentrate on work rather than Krishna.
But if you're that, are you a mother?
Yes.
Okay. When you're doing your work, are thoughts while you're doing your work going to your children?
No.
Because you're attached to them. Same. You got it? That's how. You're doing your work and you're attached to Krishna. How do you get attached to Krishna? Do nice sadhana, because that's substantial. And the others are ephemeral.
Practice.
Got it? And, because it's eternal. How long, there was a time when you weren't a mother, now you're a mother. And then when your body is gone, you're going to become who knows what. And the objects of attachment are going to be different, but some objects of attachment will be there because that's the nature of the modes of nature and time. So now how do you get beyond the modes of nature and time? By becoming transcendentally attached. We're going to go online. Our online people are probably feeling neglected.
This is a two-part question from Sanchari Dasi. So the first question, is the transition from unsteady to steady bhakti smooth? Meaning, does such a person notice when this transition takes place?
It's never smooth, but they know it's taking place. And the knowing may be gradual. I mean, if you could take a snapshot of your life 3 years ago and a snapshot of your life today, it's definitely different. But you may not be noticing it, but it certainly hasn't been smooth, right? Been bumpy, but there's transition in any case. Next.
A follow-up, what are the characteristics of one who is actively in the middle of that transformation?
Discomfort, but determined, despite the discomfort. Transition, this is a general statement. Transition is generally uncomfortable. You go from something known to something unknown. There's adventure, but it's also uncomfortable. Next.
That's all on
That's it. Okay. One question in the room. Our host family, you want to contribute something here? Okay.
Maharaj, so I'd understand is we are a spirit, soul is eternal, and we have a temporary situation right now because of our conditioning. So in our temporary situation, we have some responsibilities and duties for which leads to our purification. We do properly.
Yes.
And there are certain things which are not well defined.
Not
well defined, like
well
for
defined.
example,
Okay.
like a couple of years last couple of years, there was a lot of turmoil here in US. There were a lot of protest and all that thing.
Yeah.
Lots. So what is is any play devotees has or role devotees has in those things, like they can participate in it or not participate? Why I thought the question is coming is twofold. One is I see the example of Srila Prabhupada and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So Srila Prabhupada was in like India freedom movement, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says don't go there and fix up in Krishna consciousness. So there, from there it is clear what is the priority. Other thing I see is like when your mind or situation is not settled or not peaceful, it is very hard to, at least our stage, very hard to do devotion, be it country level or community level or family level or even mind level. So if any things which can contribute to make or things better, not guaranteed, but at least do we should participate in it, or just focus on what is the most important thing and not bother too much about these things, injustice or insult or things like that?
You have said many things, but I'll just focus on one thing. The social activism or political activism question. I'll respond by giving a little exchange with a high school girl who's, it was in a, before pandemic, in a temple room full of 150 people, sat right in front, kind of a socially outgoing kind of personality. Said, I want to know if what I'm doing by involving myself in gun control is the right thing to do. Because whenever I read about all this gun violence, I got to do something. And I've been doing something. She didn't give examples, but knowing her, I'm sure she did. So, but now I'm starting to wonder, am I doing the right thing? So I responded by saying, supposing through whatever the measures are, X, Y, Z, it puts the access to guns less. The modes of nature are going to continue acting, so it's going to come out some other way or some other way or some other way. Now you know that because you're a devotee, and these other people don't know that. Now, if you can figure out a way where you can give transcendental knowledge to the people that don't like gun violence, do that. But if you don't do that, you're not being part of the solution, because the modes of nature are just acting up. What's the solution? When Vyasadeva looked at the age of Kali, what did he do? He compiled the Vedas and then finally the Bhagavatam. So distribute books, or teach that, get into relationships with people that are out there with gun violence activism, and help them understand the deeper issue. It's forgetfulness of Krishna, and the modes of nature are acting, and they're going to continue acting, if not this way, then that way, then 10 other ways. You know that. She was like you're doing. She said, I got it. Now, I don't know what she did with that understanding, because when you see people being hurt, you want to do something. You'd have to be callous to not want to do something. So what's the something? What's that path that's recommended? Now, you gave a nice example, Bhakti Siddhanta's example of discussing with... Anyway. So over here, our hostess.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
I'm going to ask your daughters to, if you want to say something, to also say something. You go first.
I'm feeling so very blessed, Maharaj, with your presence. And I'm feeling like hearing more and more. Thank you so much.
That's it. Okay. Girls, anything? Comment, feedback? Don't like it? Bored? Too much? Let me out of here? Okay. Okay. I guess that's it. Srila Prabhupada ki